Lesson 5.7, Inverse of a function. Sometimes with dealing with functions, you want the opposite operation. So instead of converting from Celsius to Fahrenheit, you want to go from Fahrenheit to Celsius. So to do the opposite, or to undo the operation, you need the inverse function. Does the opposite. So what are the properties of an inverse? An inverse are when the x and y values are switched. That is the main things, the x and y's. Instead of x being the input and the y being the output, if y is the input and x is the output, you get the exact opposite operation. So instead of putting money into the machine and getting candy out, you put the candy into the machine and you get money out. A graph is reflected over the line y equals x. So if this is my graph, there's the line y equals x. It's reflected over that line. This distance and that distance are the same. This distance and that distance are the same. They're just on the other side of that slanted line, same distance away. You can use the horizontal line test to determine if the inverse of a function is also a function. And that horizontal line test is, if the horizontal line can touch the graph more than once, then the inverse is not a function. So if we look at our parabola, horizontal line touches more than once. The inverse, which you can see from above looks like that, that inverse is not a function because each x value gives you more than one y value. So what is the formal definition of an inverse? Well, two functions are inverses if and only if the compositions equal x. So if I take one and I plug it into the other and I get x, then they are inverses. So let's verify that these are inverses. So verify indicates that they are inverses. We are just showing that they are. So I need to find f of g of x. So I'm going to take function g and I am going to plug it into function f. Just 6 minus 2x, but x is the entire other function. And now we just have to simplify. In parentheses, I can't do much, so I'll multiply. When I multiply and divide by 2, they cancel out. And then I have 6 minus 6, which cancels out, and I'm left with minus a negative, which is plus x. Wow, look at that. So now let's find g of f of x. Let's go the other direction. This time f is in the middle, so it's going to be plugged in for the x in g. So it's 6 minus x, but x is our function f over 2. So 6 minus 6 cancels out, and on top I have minus a negative or positive 2x over 2. 2's cancel out, and I have x. Notice both times we got x, so that shows they are inverses. Finding inverses. To find inverses, switch the x and y coordinates. So what we're going to do is we're going to switch the x and y and solve for y. For example, we have this. The y will become x, and the x will become y. Now just solve for y. So we could subtract the 7, divide by 2. Of course, we usually write this y equals x minus 7 divided by 2. Or if you'd like, you could write it as 1/2 x minus 7/2. Either way. All right, let's find the inverse of this function. Oh, wait, I have f of x. But remember, f of x is the same thing as y, so I could write it like that. All right, to find the inverse, y's become x's and x's become y's. So everywhere where there is an x, make it y. Everywhere there's a y, make it an x. And then solve for y. So we're just solving the equation part, not the y is less than 0. So we're going to solve for y here, so we'll subtract 2. And then I need to do a 4th root. Remember, when you do a 4th root, that's an even root, so you have to put the plus and minus. But wait, we want y to be less than 0. So less than 0, that would be the minus. So we only want the minus. Or we usually write it y equals negative 4th root of x minus 2. Now, why is it not plus and minus? Because the instructions said we wanted only y is less than or equal to 0, which would be the minus. And since we used that to decide it was just a minus, we don't have to write it anymore. The power in watts, which is power, how quickly it uses energy, of a light bulb that has a resistance of 240 ohms is represented by the function f, where x is the current. Find and interpret inverse f of 60. All right, so that little symbol there stands for the inverse of f. Okay, so let's start by just making that a y. Let's switch the x and the y. And solve for y. And we'll have to square root. Now, when we square root, we should have a plus and minus. But let's think about this. What does this actually mean? Well, this actually means the original f gave, it went from current and gave us power. So our inverse is going to be inputting power and giving us the current. Now, it's not plus and minus. We're just going to use the positive. So we have that. Now, we started with an f of x. We should probably finish with writing it as functional notation, like that, where it's f of to the negative 1, which means inverse f of x. And then we want to plug in a 60. So if I plug in a 60, 60 over 240 is 1/4. The square root of 1/4 is 1/2. So what is that? That is the current in amperes. So it's 1/2 amps.